things they care about, as well as on national security matters, which they care about as well. It's a stark contrast. What's happening in the Senate is a stark contrast to the partisan race to the bottom we saw in the House, where House Republicans are pushing partisan legislation that has zero chance of passing. House Republicans should look to the Senate.
Her son received his stimulus check, an actual paper check, which she was trying to help him find where to cash without being charged a fee.
I just feel like I'm being cheated, robbed.
PLS check cashing takes 1% plus $1, meaning only $13 in fees on a $1,200 stimulus check. Other check cashing services said they would charge the government.
We finally have some breaking news, everybody. Important information has been released by the IRS, and lawmakers are actually working on making some big changes that will affect inflation and the current cost of living adjustment, meaning that many of you guys could expect to receive a stimulus check in a couple of days. So here are some new details on what the federal government is doing right now. Right now, Americans are hoping for wage gains to offset the hottest inflation in 40 years, but there are a number of factors that can impact your take-home pay in 2023. And because inflation is rising so sharp, the IRS and other agencies are changing many rules to account for the increase in prices. For instance, the tax agency said this week that it's boosting its 2023 tax brackets by 7% because of inflation. This is a move designed to avoid bracket creep, which is when people get pushed into higher tax rates because of cost of living salary adjustments, although their standard of living hasn't even changed. And the IRS is also increasing the standard deduction by the same percentage, which will benefit most taxpayers who use this tax break. Inflation adjustments to tax brackets mean it will be harder for taxpayers to hit those higher brackets, and therefore we'll have more income taxed at lower rates next year. So what does this mean for you? Well, the interplay is that these changes is complex, but the upshot is that many low and middle income taxpayers may be able to trim their taxes as a result. The outlook is more complicated for higher income workers because of an inflation adjusted boost in the cap for Social Security taxes. According to a recent survey for 2023, employers plan to roughly offer their workers an annual raise of 4%. That's roughly in line with the median pay bump that employees got in 2022. The problem is that inflation this year has been running at about twice the rate, with prices rising 8% in September from a year ago. Economists at the Federal Reserve also expect inflation to subside later this year and into next year as well, although the central bank has been criticized for its last call that the sharp rise in prices was transitory. Now, if the Fed is correction in predicting that inflation will decline next year, it will restore some purchasing power for consumers next year. So far, though, inflation has remained very high. We all know that. And the IRS is boosting its taxable income thresholds for its 7 tax brackets, which range from 37 to even 10%. The higher limits could result in tax savings for some people, that is. And the IRS also announced this. It's boosting the 2023 contribution limits to the 401k plan by a record $2,000 due to inflation. It will allow workers to save more money in 2023. Individuals will be able to save up to $22,000 in their 401k next year, an increase of almost 10% from the current year's limit of $20,000. The new cap also applies to other types of defined contribution plans. The IRS said the contribution limit for IRAs will increase to $6,500 next year, a boost of 8.3% from the 2022 limit of $6,000. However, the catch-up contribution for people over the age of 50 will remain at $1,000 because that rule is not subject to any annual adjustment for inflation. The Social Security Administration taxes wages to fund the program, but it caps the amount of individual earnings that can be taxed within a calendar year. That cap changes every year to align with the National Average Wage Index. Because of inflation, the taxable minimum will rise to $160,000, an increase of almost 9% from the current cap of $147,000. That means higher earners will pay a Social Security tax of 6.2%. Democratic lawmakers are finally making huge progress on the fourth stimulus package, and it has been decided that billions of dollars in unused relief money will be going towards new stimulus checks for certain Americans. If you want to receive this fourth stimulus check, then be sure to continue watching this video because you definitely don't want to miss out on this. The Pennsylvania legislature has until June 30th to pass a new budget approaches. Pass a new budget, support for some spending of the state's billions of dollars in remaining stimulus money and surplus tax revenue is gaining bipartisan action. Discussions are preliminary and top budget negotiators want to reach a deal as soon as possible, but lawmakers, lobbyists, and top staff pointed to a small number of partisan proposals that have been put forward. on issues from the environment to childcare that could be building blocks for a spending plan. The House Appropriations Committee Chair told a reporter this week that we move forward trying to identify areas of agreement first, and then we'll identify areas of disagreement and try to work through those. Each year, Pennsylvania's governor and legislature must agree on how to route tens of billions of dollars to education, economic development, and human services. These are decisions that affect every person in Pennsylvania. But the state's financial picture has changed in recent years, with the state's coffers getting $8 billion boost from stimulus money in 2021. In response, Wolf and his legislative allies called on the legislature to spend some of that windfall on higher education, paid family leave, and school repairs, among many other priorities. Early this year, Wolf released a budget proposal that would appropriate billions of dollars more to education and infrastructure. Republicans countered that additional spending would actually fiscally be responsible. But everybody, Pennsylvania still has about $2 billion in remaining stimulus money, and at least $5 billion in surplus tax revenue. To address the soaring cost of living and inflation, Governor Wolf is pushing the legislature to approve using American Rescue Plan money to give people $2,000 stimulus checks. They would go to every household earning less than $80,000, which is the majority of people in Pennsylvania. Other issues are getting Republican attention, everybody, like more state funding for childcare and pre-K, nursing home, and housing. Progressive lawmakers have been building bipartisan support for a broad housing plan, Whole Homes Repair Fund, which would actually use stimulus money to provide grants to homeowners and landlords alike to make renovations big and small. After 2 years and 6 relief bills into the crisis, the U.S. has spent the majority of its available stimulus relief funding, but billions of dollars across a handful of categories have not gone out the door. Beginning under the former president and continuing now with President Biden, Congress has approved some $4.5 trillion in total aid spending. According to Treasury Department data, federal agencies have formally committed to using about $4 trillion in that, and have made about $3.5 trillion in actual payments to date. Budget experts say that it can often take time for the total pot of funds to make its way to the American people. That's because government agencies such as the SBA and Department of Labor go through a process of legally committing to a portion of allotted funding, which is known as obligating. Then they start to actually spend it. The $500 billion or so in available relief resources have not been obligated and may not end up being spent by agencies. What are your thoughts on this, everybody? Is President Biden going to do something about this and help out the American people with stimulus checks this year? Or will President Biden hold back the stimulus? Tell me what you think on this.
Mr. Dodaro, I'm going to start with a round of questions, and then it looks like the next person up will be Senator Johnson. Mr. Dodaro, to date, GAO has made 121 recommendations on actions that Congress could take to address the wasteful spending and inefficient operations listed in the annual duplication report. There are currently 59 open recommendations. How should Congress prioritize which recommendations to address? Are there particular recommendations that you think we should focus on first?
I absolutely think those recommendations that have significant dollar